Welcome to Innovating Clinical Trials, the podcast designed for clinical research professionals eager to deepen their understanding of clinical trials through concise, insightful segments. Join your hosts, Liam Eves and Ted Trafford, as they uncover the core issues in clinical research, reflect on the industry, and challenge conventional wisdom.
Hey, Liam.
Hello, sir. How are we?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm living the life, living the dream.
Amazing. So I was thinking we always start talking about the weather, and our listeners don't care what the weather is. And I honestly don't care what your weather's like.
It's the UK.
Yeah,
It's miserable.
It sucks all the time. So instead, tell me something interesting that's happened to you recently.
Oh, interesting. I'd say something that's funny that I can't work out and none of the rest of the house can work out. So we've got 3 dogs.
Okay.
I think as a family, we're becoming more of a pack than a family.
Who's the alpha?
Who's the alpha? Yeah. It's the smallest one who weighs like 2 kilos.
Nice.
It's ridiculous. So the middle-sized one is a Morkie called Hamilton. And somehow, and no one can work it out because he's not done it at the minute whilst people have been around, he's worked out how to open the back door and get out.
Oh, no.
So he's thankfully it's fenced and things like that to the yard, but he's worked. So every so often I just see him out because I work in the office, my office in the garden, and he's just casually just having a little sniff around the garden with the door wide open. And so yeah, I'm gonna have to set some camera up.
Yeah, like you need to do that
to try and work it out.
Yeah, see how they're getting out.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah,
unbelievable.
That's anyway, awesome.
On a slightly different note, love that question. On a slightly different note, I have been thinking long and hard about something for the last probably couple of days, maybe a week. And what I've been trying to do is I've been trying to understand the operating system and the wider ecosystem of clinical trials. The ones that are made up of incentives, contracts, timelines, handoffs, tools, decisions, and really get into the day-to-day reality of delivering studies inside, delivering them as a whole. I've also got a couple of ideas that frame some of the thinking around that. So I've come up with these like misalignments, or what I'm calling misalignments. And my thinking is at the end, I'll try and bring it together a little bit into an idea or a central theme. So let me first start with two ideas that I've uncovered and then go into the sort of misalignments. So idea one is that we don't have a talent problem, right? The vast majority of people in this industry are ridiculously good, ridiculously intelligent, and they're massively competent and they care and they're often working extremely hard. So when we see these like predictable failures that happen again and again, delays, screen fails, sites drowning, CRO frustration and the like, my default assumption is now if good people keep getting bad outcomes, it's not the people, it's the system. So effectively, if the same film keeps playing with different actors, it isn't the actors that are bad, it's the script. So that's number one problem statement. The idea number two is around outsourcing. Outsourcing isn't the problem. It's really, again, this misalignment or this idea of misalignment. Because ultimately it's not optional for the right. Vast majority of companies. It's actually because the small sponsors can't run the studies fully in-house and larger sponsors are still outsourcing large parts of their delivery. So CROs and sites are obviously a structural part of the industry. But here's the thing, that most of these sponsor CRO relationships aren't partnerships. They're more like fire drills. So they're patchwork scopes wrapped in these hopeful timelines with oversights that is often more about reporting than actual control. So when the trial starts to wobble, everyone acts surprised, yet we act like the problems appear out of nowhere. We can blame things like execution or blame the CRO or even blame the sites and not performing. But I'm increasingly convinced that execution doesn't fall apart randomly. Right. It actually falls apart logically. And this is basically because of some of these misalignments. Now, I've got a few that I'll go through. So what I mean when I say misalignment is that three things. One of them is incentives. So essentially what people are getting or organizations are getting paid for. The second is a misalignment around information. So this is what people can see and when they can see it. And then things like misalignment around decision rights. So who can actually decide and then how fast. So if those three don't line up, everyone then ends up optimizing locally.
Yeah.
But it's ultimately the payer that then pays on a global level, right? With that lens, I want to just talk around. I've got probably about 5 or 6, but I think we just maybe go through a couple of them today. But so it'd be great to, get your thoughts, Ted, around some of these as we go through them.
Yeah, absolutely. If I understand correctly, one of the challenges that you're talking about here is that we're optimizing in pieces instead of optimizing the whole.
Exactly.
And you may have a phenomenally optimized piece, but if it doesn't hand off or connect appropriately with the next piece, you're going to have chaos.
Exactly. And those things just compound, right? Is that it's actually what they say it's the sum of the parts that is the biggest part. It's like it's any constraint in any system. You only can operate as fast as that constraint. But if there's multiple constraint, it just has a compounding effect. So like a good one to kick off is there's a misalignment around research and healthcare. So when we think about research or when we think about healthcare, actually, the way I see it is that enrollment is basically the operationalizing of research on a healthcare platform.
Okay.
So what happens is that problems arise because the two are diametrically opposed. So we have patients in research, a sort, right? So there's a skill set that's required in order to find these individuals. Mm-hmm. Whereas in healthcare, they come to you. In things like in research, disease is granularized, whereas in healthcare, it's more generalized. There's like things like documentation, extremely detailed in research, but like very minimum within the healthcare system and structure. So basically you have this like research wanting this controlled, continuous, time-driven execution, whereas in reality, healthcare is more episodic, it's more capacity constraint, and it's built for care, not for controlled experiments. So we're trying to overlay research on a system that is completely different, and also the skill set of those individuals is completely different. Correct. So we're expecting this to translate when in actual fact it doesn't. And that's so like I think that's one of the big areas where you see that when you're trying to deliver some of these trials and you're feeling like you're constantly having to swim upstream, that this is one of those reasons. So like protocols often assume this very clean and controllable pathway, but the reality is life is messy. Yeah. And so you get like this in the boardroom, you get this like a trial looking very feasible.
Yeah, pristine.
Exactly. But in the real world, it's completely fragile.
Yeah.
It doesn't stand like first contact.
Yep.
It just like dissolves, which I think that you ultimately can't recruit patients into this fantasy system. So therefore it breaks apart as a result. So that's my first one. So it'd be great to get. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're spot on that we have these designs, these plans, and as you said, don't survive first contact because we're dealing with real people, real organisms, real patients. And I think that's a really interesting concept about the vast difference between the medical system and the research ecosystem.
Yeah.
And how do we make that bridge from one to the other? And what do we need in order to construct that bridge? What tools do we need to put in place? And holistically, do we even understand what the challenges really are?
Yeah.
Do we
Yeah.
ask enough questions?
Yeah. And those, I think everything can be solved by applying the right skill sets to problems, and that just by hoping that we apply these skill sets that are never really taught, they're just on the job training, and that reality is if sites are not very good at those things, or anyone in fact is not, you get a poor outcome, especially when it's on something so pivotal. This is like first principle thinking, is that you are effectively trying to extract individuals within a healthcare system, and it's not made for research. So yeah, so that was my first misalignment thought. My second one was around budget versus true work, and this is around the site's capacity. And as a past site operator, I know this very well, is that budgets effectively fund patient visits, but the real work is everything around that visit.
That's right.
That isn't seen. You've got your pre-screens, your record chasing, scheduling gymnastics, rescheduling queries, blah, blah, blah. Is that this is what, like, or where time often just disappears for individuals, and it's almost never funded properly.
Correct.
So eventually, sites either take those losses, or they quietly under-resource the study, or performance, and as a result, performance drifts. And the reality is that the budget funded only the visible part.
That's right.
It didn't go any deeper than that. I just call it like the iceberg problem. You just see what's on top, and you go, "Oh, that's the iceberg." It's actually, 80% of it is below the waterline, guys.
Yeah, yeah. And you hear sites, you go to conferences, and you hear sites online talking about the issues they have with portals, and having to deal with 10 to 15 different portals every study, and how often they don't work.
Yeah.
And I actually had a sponsor the other day talking to me, and actually was a little disappointed in the recruitment for a particular study, but the reason sites weren't recruiting was the portal. And they were talking about issues with this particular portal and calling it a protocol deviation, and the site getting a protocol deviation because they had to do a workaround because the portal didn't work. And I'm like, this is insane. The issue was the portal, and the site did everything they could to keep the patient safe and in the study, and yet the sponsors calling it a deviation is upset. So it's just insane.
Yeah, it's wild. It's just, I think that, like, when ultimately the work isn't funded,
Yeah,
the system will always find a way to pay for it later, and that's usually through delay, rework, or just chaos.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately that then pushes into misalignment 3, which is around the sponsor goals versus the CRO commercial goals. So ultimately, sponsors want, and again, back to the backbone, is everyone's doing a great job, everyone's got the right intentions and things, but incentives will change the way in which and how we operate. So that's just my caveat out there, or my legal. Ultimately, like, sponsors want speed and they want certainty, and many CRO commercial models reward activity, utilization, and scope management. And again, I'm not saying that anyone is evil. I'm saying that this changes behavior. So if you pay for effort, you'll get effort. If you pay for throughput, you'll get throughput. Now, in a CRO's plan, is that it's already fragile and underfunded, then which happens all the time. And then you start to look at what is the path of least resistance: more hours, more change orders,
right,
and more process, more reporting. Because when the plan is wrong, the change in scope becomes a strategy. And I think that that's really super important, because motion is not necessarily progress, and billing is not delivery. It's about, once that dynamic kicks in, the whole ecosystem shifts into a very protective mode, which I think is ultimately like really dangerous. And there's a couple more that we'll probably get to another time, but I think that for me, what becomes really interesting is that these misalignments don't operate in isolation, right? They stack. And as a result, when it's wrong, they can compound and they essentially amplify each other.
Yeah.
And that compounding is what's called a Lollapalooza effect. I just love that word. And basically, a Lollapalooza effect is when these multiple forces reinforce each other. So the combined outcome is much greater than it would be on its own. I guess in plain English, in non-Liam gibberish, is that it's not one thing that's killing the trial. It's many things that are reinforcing each other until failure becomes effectively the default. And I think that like a trial can survive one misalignment, but it can't survive loads of them.
That's really interesting. And when you're talking there, I think we'll finish with this, but I want to tell you about a movie called The Replacements. Have you ever seen it? It stars Keanu Reeves.
No.
Okay, so it's a football movie. It was made, I don't know, 15 years ago or something. But so in the movie, the football league goes on strike, and Keanu Reeves is brought in. His character Shane Falco is brought in as the quarterback for this team made up of replacement players. And they're struggling, obviously. And so at one point they're having a team meeting and the coach is asking them about their fears. And they start spouting off all sorts of different things. And then Shane Falco speaks up and says quicksand. And the other guys are like, oh, yeah, quicksand is terrifying. And the coach says, I don't think that's what Shane meant. And so then Shane Falco goes into this explanation that on the field, when you have one mistake, it's just one mistake. But then there's a second mistake and a third mistake, and they compound, and you get to the point where you're struggling so hard to get out of this mistake cycle that you just keep sinking deeper and deeper, and the mistakes compound. Yeah.
I love that. We should remove Lollapalooza and call it the Falco effect.
Yeah.
Good. I'm going to have to watch the movie now.
Yeah, it's a good movie.
It's about American football rather than
Sorry, yes.
Football.
Yes, my friend. American football is played with this oblong ball. and there's not actually a lot of use with your feet other than running. So occasionally they kick the ball, but only under certain circumstances, and only certain people are allowed to kick the ball. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for your time, Fred. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Have a great day.
Bye.